Hey everybody, I'm Alejandro Perez from CGI Nerd, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at classes in Python using Houdini. So let's set up our scene. I want to get the Python shell running so that way we can see outputs, and then I'm going to create a new shelf tab. Oops, not shelf tab, I already have the shelf tab. I want to create a new tool. This is going to be classes, and then classes. Okay, so in this tool, we're going to start off by looking at the basics of classes, and then we're going to go through the process of doing a practical example, creating a window using classes in PySide, and then we are going to kind of run the material tool that we created last week, or in the last video, using that window. Alright, so let's take a look at classes. So we're going to start off by defining a class, and that starts off with the word class and then the name. Typically the convention for classes is that the first character of the name is going to be capitalized, and then we end the line with a colon. Anything that is immediately after that that is indented is going to be part of the class. Classes are kind of like functions in that they are blueprints, but these create objects and they're quite a bit more powerful. You can do a lot of things. One of the things is defining a method, which is a function within a class. So there is a special method here that is the initialize. So if you define this method init, and then we have arguments here, just like a regular function, but anytime we create this class, it is going to run this init method. And then again, we have a colon at the end, so anything that is indented immediately after that is going to be part of this init method. And then here I'm going to be instancing the variables that we're going to be using. So looking at the arguments that we have over here, we have name, position, and location. The very first one is self. So self is a convention. It doesn't really have to be self, but within classes that's kind of the convention. So anytime you are referencing the particular instance of a class, you're going to call self. And so over here we are setting what the variables are. So when we create this class, we can set a name, position, and location, and then the name is going to be equal to name, position is going to be equal to position, and location is going to be equal to location. This is going to basically be held within the instance, and that's why we're telling it that it's self.position. So anytime it calls this instance, we can get it. It'll make a little bit more sense when we are running everything here. Okay, then in the next line, we are going to define another method. So you can have multiple methods inside of a class. And here's basically a second method, and it's just going to be a print statement. And that can be run by the class itself. So when we create an instance of a class, it's called an object. So we can have it called something like this. We have a variable name, we call the class name, and then we give it the arguments that we set up in the initialize function, or sorry, method. So let's apply this, and then when we run this, we should see nothing yet, because this is like a class where we are only creating a blueprint. It doesn't actually run any of the, well, it did run the initialize method, but we aren't printing anything, so we don't see anything in the console out here. Let's do a call really quick. Okay, so now if we want to actually run one of these methods, we're going to call the name of the object and then the method that we're trying to run. We can see that self is an argument here, but we don't have to put that because self is basically being defined up here in the initialize, and it's saying that we are going to run it on itself. Let's apply and run. You can see Alejandro is a crowds effects artist at CGI Nerd. There we go. So the kind of powerful thing about doing this is that we can create multiple instances of this. And if we look at it here, we can see I'm creating a Bob object, and then we can call Bob with that and that method. And each time that these will run, it will run its own version of the method based off of whatever that object's settings are. So I'm going to apply, and then let's run these. You can see that it says Alejandro is an effects artist at CGI Nerd, Bob is a dust effects artist at Pixar. So that's kind of the basics of classes. It's kind of like a holding object type thing where we can call multiple methods from inside of it and have it customized per object. There's a lot more, but that's kind of like the basics. There's also ways of inheriting from other classes and things like that, but that's kind of out of the scope of what I want to go into in this example here. But when we're actually creating the window, we'll do that with some of the PySide module content that we have. So let's clear this and let's take a look at creating the window. So there are a few modules that we're going to need to import. We're going to import Who, we're going to import the OS, and then we're going to import PySide. And I'm just kind of abbreviating that as PS for PySide. So like I said, we are going to take that example, and I just pasted that in here, of the assigned materials, and we need a path and a material. Basically it's going to go through and assign a material based off of whatever texture files are inside of a specific path. So we need a path variable and a materials. We'll create that in a little bit, but that gives us kind of a start, so that way we don't have to rebuild this. It was all rebuilt in a previous function or previous video. I'll put a link for that up above on a card right now. And then let's take a look at creating one more function that's going to be helpful for us, and I'll explain kind of what's going on. Here we're going to get the Houdini main window. So with PySide, the interface of Houdini is created with that. So if we want to get the main window application that is running, we can use this Who module function, which will get us that module and make sure that we're using the correct app, so that way we don't crash Houdini, and also it could stay on top of the window here, because if not, when you clicked on the main Houdini window, your window would go kind of behind it. Okay, we're going to create a class here, and in this class we can see we're just calling it create window, and then we're actually inheriting from the Qt widgets module, the Q dialog. So we want to get all the functionality from Q dialog inside of this class. So if we, inside of parentheses, when we're creating the class, tell it that we are inheriting, basically that's what it does. It gives us all the functions, or sorry, methods from that previous class and incorporates it within this class. So this would be a child relationship of the Q dialog class that we're creating. So the create window is a child of Q dialog now, which means that we can use all the Q dialog functions within here. Here we are initializing the class that we're creating, we need it to be self, and then we're saying parent equals this function that we are creating here. So the window, when we create it, it is going to be a parent of the Houdini main window. Then here we're just creating a super of the create window. Basically we're using a class from Q, or a method from QDialog that is initializing a window, and it's going to use the parent that we're defining here to create that window and assign it to the Houdini application for the UI. Here we're going to set some basic settings within this initialize function for the window. So self set window title, we're giving it a title, and this is, we can do this because we've created the window from the QDialog. So these functions now exist because we're using the QDialog, and it's using the methods from QDialog to be able to set the title, and it's using all of the commands from that. Set minimum size, so we got 300 by 80. And then finally we have the set window flags. So in this, there's like a question mark on the PyQt windows, and I'm just kind of removing it so that way it doesn't have it in there because I don't really use it. Then here, these are going to be custom methods that I'm going to create. So the create windows, create layouts, and create connections. So inside of the create widgets, that's going to be the UI elements like fields, buttons, and anything else that you're going to be using inside of the window itself. Create layouts is how it's positioned within your UI, and then create connections is going to be if you want to run any functions when you push a button or have interactivity with your UI. That's where I'm going to create my functions. So let's do the first function, or sorry, method. I'll get those terms mixed up a lot, so I'm sorry about that. But the first method that is custom for my class here is going to be the create widgets, and we're calling it self, so we know that it's going to be for this create window method. And then we have a texture path, which is a QLine edit. That QLine edit is going to be basically a text field that we can type in something. Then we have a texture path button, and the Houdini module does have some Qt pre-made functions for us, so that way we can make our UI look like Houdini's UI. And in this case, I'm going to use a button that is inside of the Who module that is automatically set to look for a file browser to be able to get a file. So then we are going to, on the texture button, we're going to create a texture button on the bottom that says assign textures. So this first button here is just for the line edit, so that way we can get the path, and then this one down here is the actual button that we do press to assign the module, or the texture, sorry. Okay, now I am going to set some properties on our window, and basically I'm doing calling the self, and then I'm looking for a texture button. So you can see that this was self texture button and it's equal to this. So now we're actually setting the properties for that. Set file chooser title, so when we actually click that button and it opens up the window, it's actually going to have a name for that window that pops up. So this one is associated with that one. Here we're setting the mode. So with the file chooser here, we're going to just read the information. And then with that same button here, we are going to tell it what type of file we want to look for. And in this case, we don't want an actual file, we want a directory path. So that's why I set the Houdini file type to directory. Now we want to lay out the elements, and I'm going to just drop in this whole method all at once. And in this method, basically we're going to create a horizontal layout, which is basically creating a line across. In this, we have the directory path layout, we have a queue box layout, and then the widget. For this layout here, we're just adding these widgets, which is going to be the line edit and the texture path button, which is this one. So that's going to be all associated with this first horizontal line. Then we are going to create a, we don't need that, that was from a previous code that we had. I'll leave it there, but it's basically adding the button. It's another H-out layout. I named it wrong because I stripped it from another code that I had before where I was working with crowd. Okay, so we have now a form layout. We basically are going to put the, we're saying that we're going to be laying out these elements there. So in the form layout, we have path to texture folder. This is going to be the description of that row. And then the create agent layout, that's going to be the second row item that it's going to be added in there. So we're basically in this form layout adding both of these lines there. And then here we're just going to add it to the main layout of the UI. So we're adding this into the UI itself. And then the next method here is going to be our connections. In the connections, basically we have the button that we created way up here. We are telling it to run, so selected file, connect. We're going to run set path texture line edit text. And then also with the texture button, which is this one, we are going to run self-assign texture. So we need to create both of those functions. And I'm just going to paste both of those immediately below this. They're short functions. They're basically telling it once we push those buttons what those buttons are actually going to do. So in the set texture path line edit text, basically we're getting the file path from the window that we created, and we are assigning it to the line edit. So that's what's the set text here. And then over here in the assign texture, we're creating the variables material path, and then we are going to basically be running this one because we need a path and a material. So when we push that button, we're going to run that initial method or function that will actually create the window. Here's the window. So the material is just whatever is the selected node. The path is that line edit, the text that we created, and then the function that we're actually running. Now, just like in the initial example that we had, we have to create an instance of that class and run it. So there's a few things that you'll want to do in order to do that with this particular window. First, we're going to run a try where we are going to try to create window.close. So this is a built-in method into QDialog. We are trying to close the window if it exists. And then if it does exist, we're going to try to delete the window. With the try, if it causes an error because the window doesn't exist, it's actually not going to cancel our method. And then except if it does create an error, or if it doesn't, what are we going to do? We're just going to pass. Then after that's happened, we can run the create window, and we are running the create window class to create it. So we're creating an instance of create window. And then another method that is built into the queue dialog is show. So that way we actually show the window. Alright, so there was a lot of content, but once we apply this, we should be able to run this button and we get our little window. So that was a lot of code to be able to get this, but let's kind of create a principled shader. We can select that shader, go to a path, and I have the CG axis materials here, white hexagonal. So I have that path. I'm going to accept, and then we can assign textures. It will assign everything to the selected material. Let's go to textures, and we can see that all those materials are assigned now, and that is basically it. So if I refresh this, we should see hopefully an example there. But that is the basics of classes and how they work. And close. Yeah, I didn't like that there, but it is working. We could assign it to a geometry or anything and render it, but we can see that it assigned and it didn't cause an error. It's actually assigning all of the materials that we need. We have the bump map and the displacement. This is just a shader issue that we are running into right now. But that is the basics of classes, basics of creating windows, and that is it. If you want a link to the textures that I'm using for this, there is a affiliate link down in the description. Other than that, we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!